Welcome to the first of two lessons on consumer electrical devices. Let's just get started. So just like our household wiring must be correct, the appliances that we buy that use electricity must also be correct. Now, there's two different groups, CSA, the Canadian Standards Association, and UL, Underwriters Laboratories, are responsible for testing devices, and if they pass, they get the CSA or the UL symbol. So I'm just going to try and show this to you. I don't know how clearly it's going to come through, but this power bar right there has a symbol with a C and then an SA inside, and that's the CSA symbol, which means that this power bar was tested, or the manufacturer of this particular one was tested. They don't literally test every single power bar, but they randomly select a few to test out of every batch, and as long as they're meeting the standards, then they pass and they get to have the logo on the device. And if the device does not have the symbol, do not buy it. Do not buy it. Do not buy it. When my wife and I lived in Toronto, our next door neighbors, they had a situation where they actually bought a power bar. They got it cheap from some store, and it didn't have the CSA or UL symbol. And about a year after we moved out of Toronto and came down here, we were still in touch with them, and they let us know that they had had a kind of a rough year because that cheap electrical, it was a power bar or one of those splitter type things. It had had a problem in it, and it caused an electrical fire in their home, and they were out of their house for about a year until they could get back in and have everything fixed. So please do not buy any electrical device that doesn't have the CSA or UL symbol. I think that's hopefully as clear as I can get it. Don't buy it if it doesn't have the symbol. Moving on in 3, 2, 1. Measuring home electricity. So in science, we use this unit called a joule. Energy in joules is pretty common, but the unit is actually too small for home electricity. We just use too much energy. Most appliances are rated in a unit called a watt. A few of them don't have the watts on them, and they'll instead have to give you the voltage and the current, but most are rated these days in watts. When we buy electricity, the unit it's purchased in is called the kilowatt hour. So the symbol for it is this lowercase k for kilo, that means 1,000, the W for the watt, and then hours, which means they keep track of how many thousands of watts we use over a period of 1 hour of time. So if you have something that's drawing 1,000 watts and it runs for an hour, that's 1 kilowatt hour. So most devices don't use a full 1,000 watts. So if it's only using 100 watts and you run it for an hour, that's 0.1 kilowatt hours. If you use something bigger like a hair dryer and let it run for an hour, that's probably going to use about 1.5 kilowatt hours. So a kilowatt hour is a much larger unit and more appropriate for household use. In my home, I probably use somewhere between 20 to 40 kilowatt hours per day, depending on what time of year it is. The calculations on how all of this really works, we're going to do another day. We're going to save that for another day. Moving on in 3, 2, 1. So here's the challenge. For many of our home appliances, the electricity used often costs more than the appliance over the time you use the appliance. So I'll use my refrigerator for an example. The refrigerator that's in my kitchen right now costs us about $1,000, but based on the electricity use, it probably uses about $300 to $350 worth of electricity per year. So you could say in about 3 years, we paid as much for the electricity as we paid for the fridge itself. And the refrigerator in our kitchen is probably now about 22, 23 years old. So we've clearly used far more electricity than what it costs to buy that appliance. So the electricity is a major component of the cost of an appliance, but most people usually aren't paying attention to it. So that's part of the challenge. Things like air conditioners, electric stoves, electric clothes dryers, electric hot water heaters, most of our refrigerators are, of course, and freezers are electric. These are the big users of electricity in our home as individual appliances. But on top of that, incandescent lighting, these are the ones that we think about as the ones that get really, really hot. If you've got these throughout your house and have no other type of lighting in your home, they use approximately 25% of the total electricity in your home. So they are a big, big contributor to the amount of electricity you use. All right, so let's move on in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so we're going to discuss on this page, the last slide, some ways for you to save money, help the environment, and we're going to get into some of the specifics of how this is going to work tomorrow, but we're going to give you a nice overview right now. First and foremost, I'm sure your parents have probably said, turn off the lights when you're not in the room. Okay, well, the whole premise here is conserve. So whenever you're not using something, please shut it off. Whenever you can, use natural methods. For example, if you have windows that you can open, sometimes you can open a window and use that to cool off a room, and opening the drapes can sometimes let light in, so you can use natural methods for that. You can use a clothesline to dry clothes when it's appropriate. So if we're talking about December, January, not going to work too well then, but there's usually about 6 or 7 months of the year when you can actually do this. I have a clothesline. I hang clothes out on there, and sometimes in a couple of hours they're dry and I can just bring them inside, fluff them for a few minutes in the dryer, and they are fantastic. Sometimes if it's really humid, it might take a half a day or a full day, but they save a huge amount of electricity for me because I'm letting nature do most of the clothes drying for me. You can replace old inefficient appliances. So years ago, my in-laws gave us a freezer because they were moving out of their house and they said we could have their old chest freezer. And so we brought it to the house, put it in the basement, and I bought a device that would actually record how much electricity the thing used in a day. And after testing it, we compared it to how much electricity would be used if we bought a brand new freezer. And we found that the electricity use would be cut in half if we got rid of the old freezer and got a brand new one. And so we ended up getting rid of the old one. And there are some government programs where you can call a certain number and they will come and haul away your old inefficient appliance like that fridge or freezer, and then you get your new one delivered. When you're choosing those appliances, buy smaller ones when you can, more energy efficient appliances, and even if those energy efficient ones cost more at first, because of how expensive electricity is and how much electricity some of these appliances use, you will see great savings. Now, we're going to talk more about this tomorrow, but I'm just going to give you one example for the moment. In my house, I have eliminated virtually all of the incandescent light bulbs. Remember I said in a previous slide that we use about 25% of our electricity for lighting if it's incandescent. So what I did was, as a light bulb burned out, I would replace it with either a compact fluorescent or an LED bulb. And even at the high school, when the new building was just 4 years old, they had started out with fluorescent lighting in that school, and they took out 4-year-old light fixtures that were fluorescent and they replaced it with LED lighting that was enough more energy efficient than the fluorescent that they said, well, rather than replacing all these bulbs and using the inefficient fluorescent, we're going to buy LEDs, and those things are going to run for, I estimate, somewhere between about 30 to 40 years. So they won't have to replace a light bulb in about 30 or 40 years in spite of how many hours a day those are on. And in the meantime, they're going to save electricity for years and years. So we're going to cover more on this tomorrow on larger appliances, but this gives you a starting point. Thanks very much.